Welcome to the Compliance 911 Show, a no-nonsense podcast discussing hot topics for today's busy compliance professional. It's everything you wanted to know about regulatory compliance, but we're afraid to ask. And now, here are your hosts, Dean Stockford of M&M Consulting and Len Suzio of Geodata Vision.
Welcome to our podcast series addressing everything you wanted to know about regulatory compliance, but were afraid to ask. I'm Dean Stockford from M&M Consulting, and I'm joined today by my good friend, Len Suzio from Geodata Vision. So, Len, what's the topic for today's podcast?
Well, Dean, last month we discussed the uncertain regulatory climate in light of the election of Donald Trump as president. As we are recording this podcast on February 12th of 2025, we now know that the president issued an executive order almost 3 weeks ago on January 20th, specifically ordering a freeze on regulations pending a review. So things are developing rapidly, and I thought our listeners would like an update on the fast-moving situation.
Well, it sounds like a timely topic, and I'm certain it's of great interest to our listeners. I am certainly a little nervous myself, given the regulatory compliance, internal audit, and commercial loan review work we do. So what does the executive order actually say, Len?
Well, the executive order freezes regulatory actions in 3 ways. First, the order forbids the proposal or issuance of any rule in any manner until a department or agency head appointed by the president after noon on January 20, 2025, reviews and approves the new rule. Second, the executive order orders the immediate withdrawal of any rules sent to the office of the Federal Register but not yet published in the Federal Register, so they can be reviewed and approved by the agency head. And then third, the order also orders agency heads to consider postponing for 60 days from January 20th the effective date for any rules that have been published in the Federal Register but have not yet taken effect, for the purpose of reviewing any questions of fact, law, and policy the rules may raise. Furthermore, the order asks agency heads to consider during the 60-day period opening a comment period to allow interested parties to provide comments about issues of fact, law, and policy raised by the postponed rules, and to consider reevaluating pending petitions involving such rules. The order also asks agency heads to consider further delaying or publishing for notice and comment any proposed rules, further delaying such rules beyond the 60-day period. So it says quite a bit, Dean.
Well, that's certainly a mouthful. As everyone associated with bank regulatory compliance knows, there are certainly the two. I always call it the two big rules: Dodd-Frank section 1071, and of course the 2023 CRA rule are scheduled to take effect between July 1st of this year and in January of 26. So those rules are so controversial that the banking industry has initiated litigation to prevent them from taking effect. So do these executive orders actually affect those rules in a different way?
Well, from a strictly legal point of view, that's a gray area. Technically, both rules have already taken effect, excuse me, but their applicable dates have yet to happen. So it could be argued that those rules are exempted from the executive order under the phrase, quote, but have not yet taken effect, end quote. However, some legal scholars contend that the litigation and the stays ordered by the courts, practically speaking, have delayed the effective dates of each rule. These technical issues may not be relevant since it's clear the administration itself wants a postponement of any pending rules or rule changes. Consequently, the agency heads are certainly not going to argue that Section 1071 and the 2023 CRA rule should be implemented as currently scheduled. The Tier 1 reporters under Section 1071 are scheduled to start collecting the mandated 1071 loan records commencing July 18th of this year, 2025, only a few months from the date we are recording this podcast. A good example of what I'm saying, excuse me, is that Treasury Secretary and Acting CFPB Director Scott Besson, only 2 weeks before this podcast, recording instructed the CFPB staff to, quote, immediately cease much of the Bureau's work, including a halt on issuing or approving proposed or final rules or guidance, and suspending the effective dates of all final rules that have been issued but not yet become effective. That was followed up by OMB Director Russell Vogt, who, when he was appointed as acting CFPB director on February 7th, only a week or two after Scott Bessent had been appointed as the acting CFPB director, Vogt immediately ordered a stop to all pending investigation and bank supervision activities. A good friend of mine, who works at the Bureau, told me the office is shut down for this week that we're doing the recording. With agency heads reflecting the Trump administration's intent to relax regulations, I think it's likely the Bureau may take the position that Tier 1 banks may see a delay on the July 18th date scheduled implementation date. But of course, until that's officially clear, all banks should operate on the assumption that Section 1071 and CRA applicable dates will be enforced as scheduled. Given the significant implications of the regulation freeze and the proximity of the applicable dates, I would expect the agency to issue some official clarifying statement in the very near future. In fact, given the profound and immediate implications of the executive order as it pertains to Section 1071, I think the clarifications are likely to happen even before this recorded podcast broadcast.
Wow. What a situation this is for banks, especially when Tier 1 banks face a data collection date commencing on July 18th, 25, only a few months from today's recording. And the other thing I saw, Len, I at least I've been hearing it around circles, is there's not much of an appetite with the new administration for referrals to the Department of Justice, which we've seen, an abundance of, I would say, over the last administration. So there is, I guess there is some good here.
Yes. Although it's confusing because, of course, the transition is so big. It's not a subtle transition. And we're still seeing, as things unfold, how the administration is going to treat regulatory compliance. But it got even more interesting recently because Congressman Roger Williams of Texas has introduced a bill to repeal Dodd-Frank Section 1071 altogether. Now, you and our listeners may think that legislative action is not likely to pass, but back in 2023, after Section 1071 rules were posted on the Federal Register, a, quote, resolution of disapproval passed both the House and the Senate with bipartisan support. Remember, that this was when Democrats controlled the Senate. The resolution was vetoed by President Biden at the time, and the Senate voted to override the veto, although receiving a majority vote, 54 to 45, with one no vote, not voting, I should say, failed to achieve the 2/3 majority necessary to override the president's veto. So there appears to be some Democrat support for rescinding Section 1071. Now, with Republicans controlling both the House and the Senate, the chances of a repeal of Section 1071 is not beyond the realm of possibility.
So it appears that that substantial changes in both the Community Reinvestment Act regulations and, of course, the 1071 rule are likely in this year. What do you advise a bank to do in light of the uncertainty that is precipitated by these potential changes?
Well, first of all, until things become clearer, the Tier 1 banks under Section 1071 should proceed to expect the July 18th Section 1071 data collection date to remain in effect until officially notified of any change. Given that some of the information mandated to be collected under 1071 is not legal to ask of a loan applicant unless it is collected pursuant to the Section 1071 mandate pertaining to small business loans as defined by Section 1071, it makes for a tenuous situation. But the rule does allow banks to collect such data a year ahead of the official applicable data collection date. So it would seem to be permissible to collect that data now. However, anyone listening to this broadcast should check with appropriate legal counsel about that matter. And I'll add that regarding Section 1071, regarding the new CRA rule, the 2023 CRA rule, of course, the first applicable date for that rule is scheduled to be January 1st of 2026. And I strongly suspect that the Trump administration will repeat what the Biden administration did back in 2021, when that administration under the OCC published a notice of proposed rulemaking, which would rescind the OCC's version of CRA, which had been approved only 6 months earlier. And then eventually, of course, that was rescinded. And then eventually all the agencies got together in 2023 and issued the new 2023 CRA rule. So I strongly suspect that we may see some change, either rescinding the CRA rule, the 2023 CRA rule, or a modification of it. And I will bet you dollars to donuts we'll see a proposed notice for comment posted, I'm going to say, in May or June, basically, of this year, 2025.
Wow. That's a lot to unpack. It's great information. It's also sound advice, Len. I think it would be a great understatement to characterize the regulatory compliance situation for bankers as uncertain. Maybe a better word would be tumultuous. Bankers should, I would say at this point, bankers should fasten their seatbelts because the next 6 months should be a fairly rocky ride, I would say. This is Dean Stockford from M&M Consulting saying thank you for joining today.
And this is Len Suzio with Geodata Vision saying we hope you found today's podcast informative and helpful. Stay tuned. We will broadcast changes in the regulatory climate as soon as they become known, and we look forward to hearing from you about topics you would like us to address in future podcasts.
Thanks for listening to the Compliance 911 Show. If you like the podcast, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. While you're at it, please give us a like and review to help others find the show. As always, links are in the show notes, and you can always find us online at compliance911show.com. Follow M&M Consulting and Geodata Vision on LinkedIn for all the latest news and information on compliance hot topics.